For 1,000 years, the Galactic Council had maintained perfect order. Wars were extinct. Conflicts resolved through diplomatic channels. Violence was a forgotten concept among the civilized species that populated the stars. The Council's enforcers, the mighty hegemony fleet, hadn't fired a shot in anger for 7 centuries. Then, humanity knocked on their door. The Council expected another species seeking membership, ready to abandon their primitive ways and embrace galactic civilization. They expected gratitude for the gift of peace they would bestow. They expected compliance. They didn't expect the humans to laugh at their ultimatum. They didn't expect humanity to declare war on the entire galaxy. And they certainly didn't expect to lose. This is the story of how a species that barely learned to leave their own solar system shattered a millennium of peace and rewrote the rules of galactic civilization. This is the story of what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object, and the immovable object decides to fight back. Some called it madness. Others called it impossible. Humanity called it Tuesday. The massive dreadnought Eternal Harmony drifted silently through the void, its crystalline hull catching starlight like a prism. Admiral Zexton of the Hegemony Fleet studied the readings on his display with growing unease. The new species had been detected 6 months ago when their crewed vessels first breached the heliopause of their home system. Standard protocol dictated immediate contact and integration into the Galactic Council's peaceful order. But these creatures were different. Admiral, his aide, a spider-like arachnoid named Clicktar, approached with nervous clicking sounds. The diplomatic vessel has returned from the human homeworld. Ambassador Velmoth requests immediate audience. Zexton's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of stress among his people. In his 8 centuries of service, no first contact had ever required more than a single diplomatic meeting. The lesser species always understood the wisdom of joining the galactic community. They saw the futility of resistance against a civilization that spanned millions of worlds. Ambassador Velmoth entered the bridge, his normally pristine robes wrinkled and stained. The tall, graceful Etherian looked haggard, his translucent skin flickering with agitated colors. "Report," Zexton commanded. "The humans." Velmoth paused, struggling to find words. "They refused our generous offer of membership in the Council. They called our 1,000 years of peace boring. When I explained the consequences of non-compliance, their leader actually laughed." The bridge fell silent. Several crew members stopped their work to stare. Laughter in response to a council ultimatum was unprecedented. "Perhaps they misunderstood," suggested Clicktar. "Their translation systems may be inadequate." Velmotha's skin flashed a deep crimson. "No misunderstanding. Their leader, a female named Sarah Chen, understood perfectly. She said, and I quote, 'Your peace is the peace of the graveyard. You've forgotten what it means to truly live.' Then, she had the audacity to offer us a counter-proposal." "A counter-proposal?" Zexton felt his blood temperature drop. No species had ever dared. "She suggested we leave human space immediately and never return. She said they had no interest in joining what she called a galaxy-spanning retirement home for species too weak to solve their own problems." The weapons officer, a heavily armored Krillian, growled low in his throat. "Typical primitive arrogance. A few antimatter bombs on their cities will change their tune quickly enough." But Velmoth wasn't finished. "There's more. I detected over 300 artificial gravity signatures in their system. Not stations or habitats, ships. Military vessels. Some of them are massive, larger than anything in our database." "Impossible," Zexton snapped. "Our intelligence indicates they only achieved faster than light travel 20 years ago. They're barely out of their Stone Age." "That's what I thought. But, Admiral, I've served the diplomatic corps for 600 years. I've seen every type of vessel the galaxy has to offer. What the humans have built, it's unlike anything we've encountered. Their ships don't follow conventional design principles. They're angular, aggressive-looking, covered in what appears to be weaponry." The tactical officer, a multi-tentacled cephalopod, spoke up. Perhaps they're compensating for technological inferiority with quantity. Primitive species often resort to crude mass production. Velmotha's skin flickered to a sickly yellow. I don't think so. During our meeting, human ships conducted what they called routine exercises in the outer system. They demonstrated maneuvers that should be impossible with their level of technology. Acceleration rates that would liquefy most species, turn speeds that would tear conventional hulls apart. Show me the tactical recordings, Zex then ordered. The main display shifted to show sensor data from Velmotha's diplomatic ship. Dozens of human vessels moved through space in complex patterns. They were indeed angular and aggressive, bristling with weapon ports and sensor arrays. But it was their movement that made the bridge crew gasp. The human ships accelerated at rates that would have been impressive for unmanned drones. They executed turns so sharp that momentum should have crushed them against their own bulkheads. They moved like living things, like predators hunting in packs. Impossible, the tactical officer repeated, but his voice lacked conviction. There's more, Velmoth continued. Their leader invited me to observe a demonstration. They called it a war game. 2 fleets of human ships engaged in combat exercises. Admiral, they were beautiful and terrifying. They fought with a coordination and aggression I've never seen. When I asked how they learned such tactics, the human commander said they'd been practicing for centuries. Practicing for what? War. They said they'd never stopped preparing for it, even during their periods of internal peace. They study every conflict in their history, analyze every battle, refine every strategy. They called it the art of war and spoke of it like we might discuss poetry or music. Zex then felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. In 1,000 years of peace, the galaxy had forgotten such concepts. Military academies had become historical curiosities. War colleges had been converted to museums. The very idea of dedicated combat training was alien to civilized species. Perhaps we misjudged their technological level, Kliktar suggested. If they're more advanced than we thought. No, Velmoth interrupted. Their technology is primitive by our standards. But they use it differently. Where we build for elegance and efficiency, they build for war. Where we design for comfort and longevity, they design to kill. Every aspect of their civilization seems oriented toward conflict. The communications officer suddenly spoke up. Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the human homeworld. On screen. The display shifted to show a human female in a dark uniform decorated with colorful rectangles and metal symbols. Her features were sharp and angular, her eyes bright with intelligence and, something else, anticipation. I am Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force. I understand you represent something called the Galactic Council. Zex then straightened in his command chair. I am Admiral Zexthan of the Hegemony Fleet. You will surrender your weapons and submit to Council authority immediately. Resistance will result in the pacification of your species. The human's lips curved in what Velmoth had described as a smile. It was not a pleasant expression. Admiral Zexthan, I'm going to make you an offer. Leave our system now, and we'll pretend this conversation never happened. Continue threatening us, and we'll show you why humanity has never known lasting peace. You dare threaten the combined might of 1,000 worlds? I'm not threatening anyone. I'm making a promise. You've had 1,000 years of peace because you haven't met us yet. You can keep that peace by turning around and leaving. Or you can find out what happens when a species that has never stopped fighting meets a galaxy that has forgotten how. The transmission ended. The bridge remained silent for long moments. Finally, the weapons officer spoke. Admiral, recommend we dispatch a battle group. These primitives need to learn respect for Council authority. But Zexthan was studying the tactical display, watching recordings of human ship movements play on repeat. Something cold was growing in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in centuries. It took him several minutes to recognize it. Fear. Signal the fleet, he said quietly. We return to Council space immediately. Sir? Clicktar's mandibles clicked in confusion. Surely you don't intend to retreat from a primitive species? Zex then looked at his aide, then, at the human ships still maneuvering in the distance. Ships built for war by a species that had never known true peace. Ships crewed by beings who spoke of conflict like artists spoke of beauty. Send a priority message to the Council, he ordered. Tell them we may have found something we're not prepared to handle. As the Eternal Harmony turned away from human space, its sensors detected more ships emerging from the outer planets. Hundreds of them. All moving with that same predatory grace, all bristling with weapons, all following the Council fleet at a respectful distance. Not pursuing. Not attacking. Just watching. Making sure the visitors left as promised. In his private quarters that night, Zex then accessed historical databases he hadn't reviewed in centuries. Records of the ancient wars, before the Council's Great Peace. Stories of species that fought not for territory or resources, but for the simple right to exist on their own terms. He found references to a theoretical type of species that xenobiologists had speculated about but never encountered. A species that evolved not just physical adaptations, but cultural ones. A species that turned conflict itself into an evolutionary advantage. They had called such a theoretical species eternal warriors. Zex then closed the files and stared out at the stars. Somewhere behind them, humanity was preparing for whatever came next. And, for the first time in a millennium, the galaxy's perfect peace felt fragile as crystal. The humans had been right about one thing. The Council's peace was the peace of the graveyard, beautiful, serene, and utterly lifeless. But what would happen when life returned to the galaxy in the form of a species that had never learned to stop fighting? Zex then suspected they were about to find out. The Grand Assembly of the Galactic Council convened in the crystal spires of Nexus Prime, the political heart of civilized space. Representatives from 1,000 worlds gathered in the massive amphitheater, their various forms of communication creating a harmonious symphony of clicks, whistles, telepathic pulses, and chromatic displays. For the first time in 7 centuries, they faced a crisis that couldn't be resolved through diplomatic channels. High Counselor Merdane, eldest of the Etherians and architect of the Great Peace, observed the assembly from her floating platform above the chamber floor. Her ancient form had grown nearly translucent with age, but her mind remained sharp as stellar plasma. She had lived through the transition from the chaotic wars of the distant past to the current age of tranquility. Esteemed colleagues, her voice resonated through translation matrices into every conceivable form of communication. We face an unprecedented situation. Admiral Zex, then, present your findings. The Admiral's 4 eyes swept across the assembly as he activated the holographic display. Images of human ships filled the chamber, angular, predatory vessels that looked nothing like the elegant designs favored by civilized species. The species calling itself humanity has rejected Council membership and threatened violence against our peacekeeping forces. They possess a military capability that exceeds our initial projections by several orders of magnitude. A ripple of concerned chatter swept through the assembly. The representative from the hegemony worlds, a massive crystalline entity named Cortex, spoke first. Surely you exaggerate, Admiral. No species discovered in the last millennium has possessed meaningful military capability. They typically surrender all aggressive tendencies upon contact with our superior civilization. I wish that were the case, Counselor Cortex. Zex then activated recordings from the diplomatic mission. The chamber fell silent as they watched human warships maneuver with impossible agility, their movements coordinated with mathematical precision. The representative from the aquatic collective, her water-filled communication sphere bubbling with agitation, spoke through her translator. This cannot be accurate data. No biological species can survive the acceleration rates displayed here. That was my initial assessment, Zex then replied. However, biological analysis of the humans suggests they possess unusual physical adaptations. High bone density, redundant organ systems, enhanced cardiovascular efficiency. They appear to have evolved specifically for high-stress combat environments. Dr. Velnar of the Scientific Consortium, an insectoid being with compound eyes that process thousands of data streams simultaneously, clicked his analysis into the translation matrix. Fascinating. Our xenobiological models predicted such adaptations were theoretically possible but highly improbable. The evolutionary pressures required would be extreme. Perhaps that explains their aggressive nature, suggested the representative from the pastoral worlds, a plant-based entity whose communication came through chemical releases translated into audible speech. Species that evolve under constant stress often display territorial behaviors. But it was Zexthan's next revelation that truly shocked the assembly. The humans possess historical records spanning 12,000 years of continuous warfare. Not territorial disputes or resource conflicts, but systematic, organized military campaigns involving billions of participants. They have developed what they call military science, the formal study of destruction and conquest. The chamber erupted in cacophonous alarm. Species that communicated through bioluminescence flashed in panic. Telepathic races projected waves of distress. Even the emotionally controlled synthetics registered elevated stress patterns. Impossible. Cortex's crystalline form resonated with harmonics of disbelief. No civilization could survive 12 millennia of constant war. The resource expenditure alone would destroy any planet. Yet they thrive, Zexthan continued. Their population numbers in the tens of billions across multiple worlds. Their industrial capacity appears to be entirely geared toward military production. Every citizen receives combat training as part of their basic education. High Counselor Merdane raised her ethereal hand for silence. Her ancient memory recalled fragments of the old times, before the Great Peace, when war was not unknown among the stars. Admiral, what is your assessment of their military capability compared to our hegemony fleet? Zexthan hesitated, his exoskeleton clicking nervously. Counselor, in my 8 centuries of service, I have never encountered a military force designed for active combat rather than peacekeeping. The humans appear to have spent their entire existence preparing for war. Their tactical doctrine, their ship designs, their training regimens, everything is optimized for maximum destructive efficiency. But, surely our technological superiority compensates for their combat experience, interjected the synthetic representative, its mechanical voice devoid of emotion but tinged with calculated concern. That's what I believed initially. However, the humans have demonstrated remarkable adaptability. In the 6 months since first contact, our intelligence indicates they have reverse-engineered several of our technologies and integrated them into their own designs. They don't copy our technology, they weaponize it. The aquatic representative's sphere churned with agitated bubbles. You speak as if they pose a genuine threat to the Council. Surely our combined fleets number in the millions of vessels. Yes, Zexthan acknowledged. But, our vessels are designed for patrol duties and ceremonial functions. When was the last time any Council ship fired its weapons in anger? When was the last time any of our crews trained for actual combat rather than peacekeeping protocols? An uncomfortable silence fell over the assembly. The answer was obvious to everyone present. The Great Peace had been so successful that the very concept of military preparedness had become obsolete. Dr. Villeneuve's compound eyes refocused as he processed new data streams. Admiral, I have reviewed the tactical recordings you provided. The humans' coordination patterns suggest they employ something called combined arms doctrine and integrated battlefield management. These are highly sophisticated military concepts that we abandoned centuries ago. Because we had no need for them, Merdane observed. When one achieves perfect peace, the tools of war become irrelevant. Unless you encounter a species that never stops sharpening those tools, Zexthan replied grimly. The debate continued for hours. Some representatives argued for immediate military action to crush this upstart species before they could spread their violent tendencies. Others suggested attempting further diplomatic outreach. The more cautious voices proposed simply quarantining human space and hoping they would eventually see the wisdom of peaceful coexistence. It was the representative from the memorial worlds who spoke the uncomfortable truth that many were thinking but none wanted to voice. Esteemed colleagues, we face a fundamental question. For 1,000 years, our peace has been maintained through the implicit threat of overwhelming force. Every species that has encountered us understood that resistance was futile. But, what happens when we meet a species that isn't afraid of us? The chamber fell silent again. It was a question none of them had considered because it had never been necessary. I have reviewed the historical archives, Merdane said slowly. Before the Great Peace, there were indeed species that chose death over subjugation. They were rare, and they were always eventually overwhelmed by superior numbers and technology. But they existed. The humans are not like those ancient peoples, Zexton warned. Those species fought out of desperation or religious fervor. Humanity fights because they enjoy it. They have turned warfare into art, science, and philosophy combined. They study defeat like we study poetry. They analyze victory like we examine natural phenomena. Dr. Vel-Nar processed this information through his analytical matrices. If your assessment is correct, Admiral, then humanity represents something unprecedented in galactic history. A species that has weaponized evolution itself, turning conflict into an adaptive advantage. What do you recommend? Merdane asked. Containment, Zexton replied immediately. Establish a quarantine zone around their entire stellar region. Post monitoring stations at every possible exit route. And pray they stay in their own corner of the galaxy. You're suggesting we abandon our principles of galactic unity? I'm suggesting we consider the alternative. If humanity decides to expand beyond their current territory, they won't ask permission. They won't negotiate. They won't follow our rules. They'll take what they want and dare us to stop them. The synthetic representative calculated probabilities with mechanical precision. Admiral, what is your assessment of our chances in direct military confrontation? Zexton looked around the chamber, seeing the faces of species that had known nothing but peace for 50 generations. Beings whose greatest conflict was deciding trade regulations or resource allocation. Civilizations that had grown soft and complacent under the Council's protection. Against any other species we've encountered? Victory would be assured. Against humanity? He paused, remembering the predatory grace of human warships, the cold intelligence in Admiral Chan's eyes. I don't know. And that uncertainty terrifies me more than any definitive answer could. The vote, when it finally came, was closer than anyone expected. By a narrow margin, the Council chose containment over confrontation. Humanity would be allowed to exist within defined boundaries, monitored but not molested, as long as they agreed to remain in their designated space. As the assembly dispersed, Merdane remained on her floating platform, staring at the holographic displays still showing human ship movements. Something deep in her ancient memory stirred, fragments of stories from the time before peace, when the galaxy burned with the fires of war. She remembered now why the Great Peace had been necessary. It wasn't just that war was destructive. It was that some species were too good at it. Her aide, a young Etherian named Quindar, approached nervously. High Counselor, shall I dispatch the containment proposal to human space? Merdane continued staring at the displays. Yes. And, Quindar? Begin quietly reviewing our military capabilities. Not the ceremonial fleets, what actual combat potential do we still possess? Counselor, surely you don't believe I believe, young one, that we are about to discover whether a millennium of peace has made us wise or weak. And, I fear we may not like the answer. 3 days later, the Council's carefully worded containment proposal was transmitted to human space. The response came back within hours, personally delivered by Admiral Chen herself. It consisted of 2 words, make us. For the first time in 1,000 years, the Galactic Council faced a species that met their ultimatums with ultimatums of their own. The age of unquestioned peace was ending, and none of them knew what would take its place. In the depths of space, human shipyards worked at maximum capacity, producing vessels designed for one purpose. And, across human space, military academies that had never stopped teaching the art of war prepared their students for the greatest examination in their species' history. The galaxy was about to remember why humanity had never known lasting peace. And, perhaps more importantly, they were about to learn whether 10 centuries of tranquility had left them capable of defending the civilization they had built. 6 months after humanity's defiant response to the Council's containment ultimatum, the galaxy discovered what it meant to face a species that had never stopped preparing for war. The first indication came from the Frontier Monitoring Station at Kepler 442, positioned at the edge of human space. The station's synthetic commander, designated Observer Prime 7, processed the incoming sensor data with mechanical precision before transmitting an urgent alert to Council headquarters. Multiple FTL signatures detected. Configuration unknown. Number unprecedented. Within hours, similar reports flooded in from monitoring stations across the human quarantine zone. Humanity wasn't just leaving their designated space, they were doing it simultaneously at dozens of locations, in numbers that made no strategic sense. High Counselor Merdane reviewed the reports in her private chambers aboard the Council's mobile command center. The ancient Etherian had lived through the transition to peace, and fragments of old military wisdom stirred in her memory. They're not trying to break containment, she realized with growing alarm. They're demonstrating that containment was always an illusion. Admiral Zex then materialized on the holographic communicator, his 4 eyes blinking rapidly in agitation. Counselor, human fleets have emerged simultaneously at 17 different locations along our monitoring perimeter. Our stations are reporting force sizes that exceed our total estimates of human military capability. Explain. We calculated their maximum fleet strength at approximately 50,000 vessels based on their industrial capacity and resource allocation. Current sensor readings suggest over 200,000 ships moving in coordinated battle groups. Merdane felt the chill of recognition. During the ancient wars, before the Great Peace, there had been tactical concepts that the galaxy had forgotten. Hidden reserves, strategic deception, industrial mobilization beyond apparent capacity. Admiral, are you suggesting the humans concealed their true strength during initial contact? More than that, Counselor. I believe they allowed us to see exactly what they wanted us to see. Every measurement, every assessment we made, they controlled the information flow. The implications staggered her. For 6 months, the Council had been making decisions based on intelligence that humanity had carefully manipulated. They hadn't encountered a primitive species stumbling into galactic politics. They had met the product of 12 millennia of military evolution, and they had been completely outplayed. What are their intentions? She asked. Unknown. The human fleets are maintaining position just outside our monitoring stations, making no aggressive moves. They're simply there. Waiting. Merdane understood. It was a demonstration of capability, not intent. Humanity was showing the Council that their quarantine existed only because humans chose to respect it, not because it could be enforced. Open a communication channel to their leadership. Admiral Chen appeared on the display within minutes, her image transmitted from the bridge of a massive warship unlike anything in Council databases. Behind her, human crew members worked with efficient precision at stations designed for one purpose: conducting space warfare. High Counselor Merdane, Chen said with what humans called a smile. I trust our fleet exercises haven't caused undue alarm. Admiral Chen, your forces have violated the territorial agreements established by the Council. Which agreements would those be? I don't recall signing any treaties. The Council made demands, we refused, and now we're having a practical discussion about the enforcement of those demands. Merdane felt the weight of her centuries pressing down on her. In all her experience, no species had ever spoken to the Council with such casual dismissal of their authority. What do you want? What we wanted from the beginning. To be left alone to govern ourselves as we see fit. The Council is welcome to maintain its 1,000 worlds in whatever peace they prefer. But humanity will not submit to external authority. And if the Council chooses to enforce compliance? Chen's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Then, the galaxy will learn why humans study military history the way other species study art. We will show you what 12,000 years of continuous warfare produces. The communication ended abruptly. Within hours, reports began arriving from across Council space. Human reconnaissance vessels had appeared in systems throughout the galaxy, conducting what they called navigational surveys. They made no hostile moves, but their presence sent a clear message. Nowhere was beyond human reach. The Council's emergency session convened within days, this time with full military leadership present. Admiral Zexthan stood before the assembly alongside Fleet Commander Nexval of the Synthetic Armadas and War Leader Krexmar of the Krillian Battle Hordes, the Council's most experienced military commanders. Report, Merdane commanded. Fleet Commander Nexval's mechanical voice carried uncharacteristic uncertainty. Human reconnaissance has mapped our defensive positions throughout 37 systems. Their ships demonstrate technological capabilities that exceed our projections. In what way? Speed, maneuverability, sensor resolution, and, most concerning, adaptability. Our stealth technologies appear ineffective against human sensors. They detect our vessels through methods we don't understand. War Leader Krexmar growled his agreement. The massive reptilians' scarred hide bearing testament to battles fought in the galaxy's violent past. More troubling is their tactical behavior. These humans don't move like explorers or traders. Every maneuver serves multiple strategic purposes. They gather intelligence while demonstrating capability while establishing psychological dominance. Psychological dominance? They want us to know they can see everything we do, go anywhere we go, and do it better than us. It's a classic pre-war intimidation strategy. Dr. Velanear processed streams of intelligence data through his compound analytical systems. Based on observed patterns, the humans are conducting what their historical records call preparing the battlefield. They're gathering the information necessary to conduct large-scale military operations against our installations. The assembly buzzed with alarm. The concept of preparing the battlefield was alien to species that had known only peace for a millennium. Surely they cannot seriously consider military action against the combined Council fleets, protested the representative from the core worlds. Our numbers alone mean nothing if we don't know how to use them, War Leader Krexmar interrupted. When did any of our crews last train for actual combat? When did our commanders last plan for real war rather than ceremonial maneuvers? Admiral Zex then activated tactical displays showing human fleet positions. The humans have positioned forces to threaten 17 major Council systems simultaneously. If they move against us, we cannot concentrate our fleets for mutual support without abandoning entire sectors. They're forcing us to choose between protecting everything and protecting nothing effectively, Nexval calculated. Classic strategic dispersal doctrine. Merdane studied the displays with growing understanding. Humanity wasn't just militarily superior, they were operating on an entirely different level of strategic thinking. The Council had become accustomed to dealing with species that thought in terms of individual planets or systems. Humanity was conducting operations across galactic distances with perfect coordination. What are our options? Surrender, War Leader Krexmar said bluntly. Accept human independence and hope they remain satisfied with that outcome. Or? Merdane asked. Fight, and learn whether 1,000 years of peace has left us capable of defending our civilization. The debate raged for days. Some argued for immediate military action while the Council still held numerical superiority. Others insisted on further diplomatic attempts. The more pragmatic voices suggested accepting humanity's independence to avoid a devastating war. It was the arrival of new intelligence that forced their decision. Dr. Velanear's analysis of human fleet movements revealed a pattern that chilled every military commander present. Humanity wasn't just positioning forces to threaten Council worlds. They were implementing what human military doctrine called total war strategy. They're not preparing to fight our fleets, Velanear reported. They're preparing to break our industrial capacity, our communication networks, our political structure. They intend to cripple our civilization's ability to function. War Leader Krexmar studied the projections with the eye of someone who had fought in the galaxy's last real wars. They understand something we forgot. Battles are won by armies, but wars are won by destroying the enemy's ability to continue fighting. How long do we have? Merdane asked. Based on their positioning and logistical requirements, they could initiate operations within 72 hours if they choose to. The final vote was closer than anyone expected. By a margin of just 3 votes, the Galactic Council chose to accept humanity's independence rather than risk a war they were no longer equipped to fight. The formal acknowledgement was transmitted to Admiral Chen personally. Her response was characteristically brief. The Terran Federation accepts the Galactic Council's recognition of human sovereignty. We look forward to peaceful coexistence between our civilizations. But it was her final line that revealed the true nature of what had transpired. We hope this demonstration has convinced the Council that humanity prefers peace, but has never forgotten how to wage war. In the months that followed, the galaxy began adapting to a new reality. For the first time in a millennium, the Council's authority had been successfully challenged. Humanity had proven that superior numbers and advanced technology meant nothing without the will and knowledge to use them effectively. The humans established trade relationships with interested species, shared certain technologies, and even provided military advisors to worlds that requested them. But they did so as equals, not subjects. The age of absolute peace was over, but something more interesting had taken its place. The galaxy had rediscovered that strength came not from the absence of conflict, but from the wisdom to choose when conflict was necessary and the capability to prevail when that choice was made. Admiral Chen's final message to the Council, transmitted a year after the crisis ended, perhaps said it best. We broke your millennium of peace not out of malice, but out of necessity. True peace can only exist between equals who respect each other's strength. You offered us the peace of submission. We give you the peace of mutual respect. We think you'll find it more durable. High Counselor Merdane, reviewing reports of increased military training programs across Council space, had to admit the human admiral was probably right. The galaxy was no longer perfectly peaceful, but it was no longer perfectly complacent either. And, in a universe where unknown threats might emerge from the depths of space at any moment, perhaps that was a good thing. The humans had indeed broken a millennium of peace. But they had replaced it with something better, the strength to protect what they valued and the wisdom to choose peace from a position of strength rather than weakness. In the end, that might be humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy. They had reminded everyone that peace worth having was peace worth fighting for.